Hey, y'all, it's 3 o'clock, so we're going to get started. First item, if there's on this table, if you would like, we're only going to hear one bill, it's going to be a hearing only. If you would like to speak to this bill, please come up and sign that sheet. It's in the back? Okay. Go ahead and do that now because Brian's about to come get it. In fact, if anybody's got it on the back table, is there any signatures on it? And while he's getting that, Mr. Pruitt, what number are you? I'm going to ask you to open us in prayer. All right, go ahead.
All right, probably with me. Father, thank you so much for this day, for this great time we can come together, Father. So that you give us open hearts today. Help us to seek your will in everything that we do and say here, Father. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, sir. All right, we've got one bill today and it's hearing only. And just a heads up, we're going to have probably two bills next week. One of those will be hearing only. And we're going to send out a message to give everybody a heads up on that. First thing I introduced, was anybody not in this room last week that's on the committee? Anybody here? Okay, Dewey, that's right. And how's your wife doing? Good. He was taking care of his wife and where he should have been. Tell us where you're from, what you do when you're not here.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And what I do when I'm not here, I watch a lot of football games on TV. As many of you all know, I'm the former president of the Atlanta North Georgia Labor Council. I'm a former pro football player. And other than that, I enjoy my grandkids, and I don't want to keep talking all day since I see Vice Chair. No, I'm sorry. But anyway, just glad to be here. This is my fifth term on this committee. In fact, it's my favorite committee. And I look forward to making sure workers and employers can live happily ever after.
All right, thank you, sir. Mr. Kirby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pro football player, I thought you were a Falcon.
Oh my God.
Oh, well. Hey, we're at least we won't mention the Rose Bowl and the Boomer Sooners, so you know it's good. Yeah, my name is Tom Kirby. I'm Vice Chairman of this committee and have been for several sessions now. When I'm not here, I'm the Human Resource Manager for Leggett and Platt, manufacturer Inner Springs Box Springs out in Monroe, and Leggett has some 20,000 employees around the world. Major manufacturer, supplier is kind of where our niche is, and always fun and enjoy being on here, and always fun having conversation with Dewey. He and I, we really get along a lot better than we act. So,
Okay. And anybody online, if you would use the raise hand option, and then we'll get to you. So that's everybody that was here. One person I did not introduce last week was my admin, who most of y'all know, Vanessa Turner. I don't know how I got the best admin, but I did. That makes people think I'm important. But she stays one step ahead of me. She's unbelievable, but she's kind of the admin for this, and she can usually get a hold of me. Okay, with that, okay, we got two hands. All right, Representative Carter.
Hello.
We hear you.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Again, this is State Representative Doreen Carter. I probably enjoyed this committee probably as much as maybe the business and education. I think it's a very important. So thank you for being on this committee. But I am a native Georgian, grew up in Atlanta. When I am not at the Capitol, I am CFO for the Society of St. Vincent de Paul. So we get to help Georgians around the state of Georgia that are having emergency needs. So again, thank you.
Anybody else who was not here last week? Is that Kennard? All right, Representative Kennard, you got your hand raised.
Yes, this is Greg Kennard. I'm a representative for District 102 up in Gwinnett County. My day job is I'm a pastor and a nonprofit CEO that works to end homelessness. This is my second term and my third year on this committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. All right. For you newer members, just a little bit about this committee in very broad terms. We don't do a lot of bills, but when we do, it affects the state in a very big way. And as long as I have any influence, I try to make it as fair to the employer as it is to the employee. That's our goal. But because of that, we hit some pretty heavy areas like we're about to do today. And we've been working on this issue for several years. In fact, this goes, the Senate had a study committee chaired by then Senator Josh McCoon. So since 2013, we've been working on this and we still haven't had legislation. That is how tough this issue is. So with that, so what we did is we put one of the smartest minds we know, and that is Representative Todd. Where you at? Come talk to us.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you very much for taking the time. I want to echo Chairman Werkheiser's comments. This is not an easy bill. So you will not hear simple bill, easy bill. All you will hear is complex. It is complex because in so many ways, this is in the eyes of the beholder. It's in the eyes of an employer, an employee, and frankly, a third party looking in to determine what is, quote, a level playing field and what is fair. For many of you, I don't know if you know or not, I'm a business owner myself. With one business, we have a couple hundred employees here in the United States of America, not including the folks that we have overseas, which we won't get into. All of them are W-2s, and we make that choice. We have another company that we just kicked off that I'm chairman. We've already gotten the PEO, and the PEO has kicked them off as W-2s. Is that right? Is it wrong? I guess we can all have an argument over whether or not they should all be W-2s or maybe some 1099. But I think at the end of the day, I think it's imperative based on not just my own personal experience, not just the conversations I've had with my colleagues, but also many of the conversations that I've had with my constituent businesses, primarily small and medium-sized businesses, and then also with many of you. In terms of our colleagues, this started out with 2 signers on the bill. I believe at last count, we're somewhere around 12 or 13 with bipartisan support. This is not a Republican bill. It is not a Democrat bill. It is I'll say a bipartisan bill. And I think that's driven by the fact that so many times we hear from our constituent businesses something to the effect of, I am and most of the time it's a tradesman. So something to the effect of, I'm an HVAC, I'm a welder, I'm a plumbing company, etc. I'm paying benefits, I'm doing the W-2, I'm doing, quote, what I'm supposed to do, what the state expects me to do. But my competitors are doing 1099, and they, of course, go through the cost disadvantage that they have. For those of you, again, who either own business or have P&L experience within your business, you understand what the challenge is. If you're holding a 20% higher cost of goods sold, then I will tell you right now, either you're not profitable or your profitability is substantially lower than your competitor who's going the other route. Now, I'm not here to say that everyone who is classified as a 1099 is an improper classification, because that would be a false statement. There is absolutely times when an individual should be and is clearly capable of being classified as a 1099. But we have significant case law in our country that lays out what a 1099 is versus what a W-2 is. And now I'd like to, if it's okay, I'd like to start transitioning to the bill. If you look and turn to page 2, please. And oh, by the way, I'm working on LC 364623. If you transition to page 2 of the bill, you'll see that section 1 and the substantive part of it starts on line 19 through line 40. That effectively codifies here in Georgia what we have through case law. And that says to us what is and what is not in terms of an employee versus an independent contractor. I think whether or not you're in business or not, I think just common sense tells you things like, well, if I can control your schedule, if I can control what you wear, if I can control how you do it, I can control what tools you use, controls what brand you use, etc. Well, that has a different level of relationship between you and that individual versus, excuse me, but I just hired you to do that project. Okay. Now, they're all not that simple. I wish the world was that literally left and right, but it's not. And I see Representative Kirby underneath his mask just giggle because I know he's in HR and he knows that classification is never that simple. But I think at the end of the day, that's what we're going to try and do, is try to help the Department of Labor and frankly, all of our constituent businesses across all of Georgia to understand we're not here to penalize you, but make no bones about it. You have an obligation as a member of our society, a member of our business community, to play by the rules, which means a level playing field. We hear that cliche, that metaphor, probably 15 times a day here underneath the dome. And I think in so many ways, this is the epitome of what creates a level playing field. Because if, and you're going back to Representative McClain, notwithstanding the joke around the Falcons, the fact is the Falcons have the same salary cap that the Dallas Cowboys have, that the Miami Dolphins have, you know, literally going on to the Super Bowl champions down in Tampa. It would be unfair to say to one team that they get 20% more of the salary cap versus the rest of the 31 teams within the NFL, because that would give them an inherent advantage based on the economy or the economics of professional football. Well, this is no different, that conversation. Now, again, I wish it was that clear in terms of the delineation, meaning just an extra 20% and you be able to raise the salary cap. It's not. But this first section tells us who is and who is not. Now, why is this so important as you turn to page 3, section 2? You should have received information around audits that our DOL has done in terms of what has been, quote, found by DOL audits. Now, whether or not you want to take that at full color, or if you want to take that at even 50%, the fact is the annualized missed payroll tax at 50% is circa 135 million, and at full boat, it's around 275 million. Now, as a fiscal conservative, I don't like to do things, quote, for revenue. That's just not my style. But I will say this, when I look at it going back to the salary cap metaphor, the fact is, if someone has an extra 270, break that down by however many companies are doing it, quote, the wrong way, that to me is a competitive advantage that can't stand. That is unfair, no different than being able to sign literally the entire all-pro team from the NFL because you have a higher salary cap. So what we did there to ensure that our businesses are motivated to, quote, do the right thing, which means just play by the rules. We now are saying we're going to put officials on the field. Okay. Sorry for all the football metaphors, but they were started. I'll keep doing it. The fact is that whether or not Coach Mullen and Coach Kirby Smart in Jacksonville, late October, if they said, we don't want to have the officials on the field, well, that's not an SEC game, guys. That's a scrimmage. No matter what the two coaches say, we put the 7 officials on the field because it's an official game. Same thing here. We're saying in section 2, that the department is able to enforce what we want them to do in terms of this classification in section 1 and how they can go about doing that, including, you'll see in line 51, a penalty of $10,000 for each individual. Now, I went back and forth on this. Is that the right number? You make it too low, then you basically have no, detriment to doing it the wrong way, because you'll basically consider that almost like a vig at Vegas. You're just paying in to the table, do it, and just move on. On the other hand, make it too high and you're being onerous. So there's a balance there to be had. Knowing that this is a hearing only, I'm open to having conversations with the members, not today, right now, but later on. Let's have that conversation as we get ready for next week to see, is that the right number or not? But I wanted to point that out because I have been told by some people that is punitive. Others have said, is that enough? Again, I think it's in the eye of the beholder because in so many times the classification is in the gray area. Moving on to still section 3, but page 4, we wanted to ensure that if you are a good actor, that if you report this type of behavior, that the retaliation against you or a company, for instance, ABC air conditioning company reports, BCD air conditioning company. We don't want retaliation that way, and we don't want retaliation against an individual working for ABC company. So what we did was we tried to codify what retaliation is and what is basically the measures that can be taken to effectively help the individual or the entity that reported the violation. And you'll see that all the way from line 70 all the way through line 93. I normally close it up by saying, well, that's it, or that's pretty much the summary. But ultimately, we tried to put this into 3 legs of a stool so that we would be able to address what we think is an unlevel playing field and how we can even it up. I start many speeches when I'm asked to make them, and I'm in a business environment. I start many speeches with, our job is to create the floor of the Roman Colosseum, step back, and may the best person win. Well, in so many ways, I think the floor of the Roman Colosseum right now is not level. In so many ways, it's pick and choose your weapon. It's pick and choose, are you going on the high side, the low side? You're going on the side of the Tigers, not the Tigers, etc. Let's go ahead and clear that field and allow the competitors to get into it and let them on an equal playing field fight to see who gets market share and see who wins the day. And winning the day means being profitable by the rules with the officials on the field. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm open for any questions, sir.
Thank you, Todd. And like I said, one of smarter brains up here. And I just want to really compliment you back on page 2, because this has really been the source of contention. I know the feds have like a 3 questionnaire scenario, but what happened over time with these gig economies, somebody working for Uber might answer the questions correctly, but they would be the opposite of what the intended. This is much better. So kudos for page 2. That's awesome. All right, we're going to start with first one, I think was Representative Kirby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative. And the Chairman is right. I mean, 2013, I didn't remember the exact year, but I know Chairman Hamilton at the time and myself as Vice Chairman signed off and helped co-sponsor that bill and got it out of this committee into rules on misclassification. This is a problem that's been going on for a long time. But in all the years in doing this, and you've, I think most people, or maybe some of the new people on the committee will learn, page 2 is codifying the Sky King decision, basically, which has worked well. And I think the wording of that, as the chairman says, is good. Where we seem to have always run into problems is truck drivers. And so we talked earlier, and I'd like to work with Legislative Council on a friendly amendment where we clearly define what an employer truck driver is. Out at Liggett, I've got employees that drive our trucks. We lease them. We pay 100% of the cost. We pay 100% of the fuel. We pay for their drug schemes, their physicals. We do, we are the employer. There's no doubt. And I think in the past, sometimes we tried to look at owner operators and how we define this, that, and after looking at what you've done and realize we've got to move on this, I think for me, the best way is that I can easily define clearly what a employer driver is. And if they're not an employer driver, then they would be probably something in how Sky King would rule 1099. But I think that would hopefully end some of the problems we butted heads with all kinds of different groups over the years. And we talked and you seem to be okay with that, and we'll see what we can come up with Legislative Council on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very open to that. And I look forward to working with you this week in order to be able to present a substitute with that type of language. Absolutely.
All right, next in line was 16. Who's that? All right, Representative Bonner.
Yes, thank you for the bill. Just a couple of quick questions. Is there a scenario under which there would be a penalty for any type of like a self-reporting issue? So like if as a business, I brought in a third party to kind of audit my books and they discovered something that was not done. Is there any issues that I would run into there as a business owner, or would I simply just need to pay whatever deficiencies there might be as a result of the audit, but not incur the fine?
I would suggest to you it's the latter. So if you find through an audit that you misclassified an employee, I'm just going to use one as an example, then my recommendation would be to get with the DOR, make sure that you paid that back tax, and make sure that that is basically transmitted appropriately to the DOR. But you know what I want to do, Representative Bonner? Let me go ahead and confirm with Leg Counsel that my answer is accurate on its face, because I don't want to provide any type of, I'll say, guidance on the legalities of that, or to find out that you're right. They are going to take a look back, meaning the DOL, after they find out from the DOR that you effectively came clean. I hate to say that, but you were coming clean in a good way,
Right.
and now you're going to be penalized. I don't believe at all that's our intent right now. Our intent is not to have a rear view mirror. Our intent is to get you into the windshield, the front windshield, and let's move forward appropriately. Going backwards isn't going to solve anything.
Sure. And
Yeah.
then my second question is in regards to the penalty amount. You know, as a small business owner, you know, that 10,000, it's pretty significant. It certainly would be for us. I'm wondering if there might be, again, a scenario under which there was some sort of escalated penalties for whether, you know, for the first infraction was a lesser amount, and then it went up from there, because as we can agree, a lot of small business owners are sometimes new business owners. And so there are those that may be in business for, you know, a period of time that, you know, they just are not aware of the rules, and to unduly punish them, you know, in that it seems to be, it could be a bit onerous for a small business. So that may be something that we could potentially look at is either a tiered system or some sort of escalation in those penalties.
Yeah, so Representative Bonham, I think we can look at a staircase. Just to give you my personal proclivity, I just want to make sure the initial trigger or the initial hurdle, whatever metaphor we want to use, isn't so low that it's basically a get out of jail card free, if you get my drift. So if we could work together during this week and find that balance, I think we can do that. One of the ideas I had last year, which was not accepted by the business community, was I wanted to actually have a portal where you could literally pre-screen. So a new business owner, to your exact point, not at all savvy in running, I'll say, the back end. They started the business because they had a passion in fill in the blank. They did not start the business because they wanted to become an HR person. What they did was they wanted to do it, but now they have to go through this. Well, they could go to a PEO most of the time and make that happen. But if they're doing it on their own, we wanted to be able to provide, or I wanted to be able to provide a portal where you effectively could get a clearance. Yep. It's okay for 1099. No, it's not okay for 1099. Based on the answers you gave, as long as they were true and accurate, you would basically have a get out of jail card free 3 years from now. If you were audited and you were told, no, we've never changed how that person works with us. But that was not roundly, I guess, positively received. So we went the other route, which was the one that we did here. And I'd love to chat with you about that staircase.
Yeah, I think the difference in kind of that perspective, which I agree with yours there, you know, do we want to incentivize or do we want to penalize? Right. And so I would much rather help a business to not make a mistake.
Correct.
Than make them pay for a mistake.
Yeah. And that was my idea of the portal is, hey, new owners, existing owners, you name it, come on in, let us give you guidance. And then that way, you know, if you're, quote, proper in your classification. It didn't pick up much steam. Maybe with a new session, and I think it's 28 new members, maybe we could find some steam for that idea.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you. That's all the questions I had, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Good questions. I like the idea about, because there's a big difference in a 2-employee getting paid a lot less than a large firm. And next, I think we had Representative McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chairman Jones, too. I guess sitting in front of me for all your years while you were here, you did pick up some of the things that I was talking about a little bit. Huh? I want to just say thank you very much, because this is to Representative Kirby's talk. The HB 500 was a decent bill, but this right here is more of a Cadillac compared to what we had as a Volkswagen, because we tried. We tried to realize a car salesman is, he is a 1099. An insurance salesman is a 1099. They are independent contractors. Even a real estate broker was that. So, and I do think that the truck driver situation is always the drive one. It depends on if you own your own truck, or if you, like Representative Kirby said, is if you if I got to pay for the gas, it's my truck and everything else. I just think the definition has to be there.
Sure.
For that. And I'm glad that we're, you know, my only concern is I'm just glad we are looking forward instead of backwards, because my question was, I mean, I just never understood why we in Georgia never thought that the reason we never had any misclassification, losing all the funds that we are losing and on workers by not paying W-2, by not paying healthcare, by not collecting payroll taxes. I mean, and I know that, so I guess I got a question somewhere in there.
Okay. Well, Representative McLean, I appreciate you using a metaphor like Volkswagen to Cadillac, because it's a US made car. But I think at the end of the day, we're on the same page. And I think that's what's important is let's take the next week. I don't want to be so presumptuous to assume the chairman is going to call this bill next week, but if he does, I want to be prepared to get all of your guys' feedback between now and then so that we're able to hopefully have a consensus next week if the chair calls it.
That is
Thank you,
my
Mr. Chair.
intention.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Is that Holly or Carpenter? All right. Representative Carpenter?
Hey, thank you, Chairman Jones. I'm just looking through this bill and I got a question. How would an Uber driver be classified under this bill? Because what I'm seeing where it says line 29, such as the location where the services are to be performed, et cetera, or requested deadlines, makes that seem to me like then they would be an actual employee of Uber.
In actuality, it's in the totality. So if you don't mind, Representative Carpenter,
Absolutely.
if you go up to lines 20 and 21, it talks about that the department shall make a determination based on such evidence, and in doing so, the department shall consider. So it's not dispositive if for some reason they meet just subsection 5, which is line 29. It's dispositive in terms of taken into the totality 22 through 36, and then the department makes the determination: is that individual a contractor or is that individual an employee? I would suggest, in my interpretation of the case law, is that an Uber driver, contrary to California state law, is in fact a 1099.
Yeah, I would agree with that too, because they don't have to, they can drive when they want to. But I think my concern is, depending on whoever we elect in Georgia as the labor commissioner, you're allowing that position to make that decision. And instead of, we do a lot of things down here that state stuff in gray areas, and then we leave it up to interpretations of departments and whatnot. And I think, as you go down this route and it being gray, it's concerning to me, depending on who you get in that position. And so that would be my, the $10,000, of course, is a concern, but just, allowing a commissioner to decide, what they're going to do in a gray area. I would much prefer a black and white, hey, this is what it is. These are the rules of the game. Because if we're going to talk rules of the game, holding's 10 yards. Holding's not 7 yards for one commissioner and 12 yards for another. So I think it's important to clarify instead of base it upon the determination of one or two people.
So since we're taking up the football metaphor again, I see the determination of 1099 and W-2, unfortunately, like pass interference.
Right.
It is not nearly, I'll say, as black and white as, a legal procedure penalty where we see the individual, the right guard, move. And at that point, that's black and white. Pass interference for so many years has been, I'll say, very much subjective. And I think in many ways, we could think about trying to codify every possible conceivable, especially gig worker.
Sure.
Maybe there's an opportunity for us to speak this week and possibly get some language in there around gig workers that lead to the intent of the legislature in terms of our intent for gig workers being X versus being Y.
Sure. Because
Okay.
clearly, if I'm labor commissioner and Dewey's labor commissioner, we're going to interpret things in a much different manner.
Yeah, I
And
see.
so
him-
that is my that's my concern. And
Sure,
think
I mean-
from a business community wanting, knowing the rules of the game and not having to deal with the personality either way is as much as we can in this scenario. But I understand what you're saying. It's a cloudy area,
It is.
and especially in the construction industry, it's a challenge. So I understand.
Okay. And I think this you start hearing these questions, everybody. This starts to tell you why Representative Kirby and others put this in 13, and now we're still discussing it in 21, 8 years later, because you literally open up one box and it's not as if the present's right there. You have to open up literally the next 20, because this is about as layered as we're going to get, because of the fact there are so many different ways, especially in today's economy, that people make a living. I mean, it's not 100 years ago where you could almost classify into maybe 20 or 30 sectors. Today, it's 2,000 or 3,000 different sectors. So again, I appreciate that, Representative Carpenter, and I look forward to working with you on possibly how we can get that language in such a way that we provide some level of flexibility, but definitely provide legislative intent. Okay.
Go ahead.
Sorry, quick follow-up too. And I will say, just for the record, you know, during the pandemic, when the federal government starts sending money down, like making it rain, you know, there's a huge group of people that prefer to be 1099 employees in scenarios that decided maybe I want to be a W-2 employee now in different industries, you know, because when the federal government's saying, well, you can get $600 bonus cash on unemployment, you know, I think it really opened the eyes to a lot of people that were frankly quite okay with being 1099 employees until that scenario happened. So I think you'll find there'll be some more synergy behind it, just because a lot of those individuals that were perfectly fine being 1099 employees felt like they got cheated on federal unemployment. So just a comment more than anything.
Thank you.
Yeah, and before I call the next person, every question has just been unbelievably good, and it just shows you how hard it is. I think the difference now between 2013 is we got a lot smarter people here. So with that, I think next in line is Robert Pruitt. Did you?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll try not to fumble the ball on those line of questions. I've been trying to think how I could fit that word in the whole time. It escaped me. That's right. Chairman Todd, my question revolves around page 4 here. So as a owner of a few small businesses myself, and like you had mentioned with something that you had going on, a lot of times I outsource those business functions, that, you know, HR, payroll type things. And so it fails me sometimes on realizing how some of this stuff works. And so this is a question just based on this, the retaliation aspect of it. Is the current setup or system where a hotline call-in type setup right now, or is this going to be initiating something like that? So this is like the way I view this is like a tattletale thing. So I see it as two different options here. Is number one, the agency that manages, they can do more audits and do a quite better, you know, a better job of managing all these things, like the deficiencies that you pointed out earlier. Or you can have this system of setup where I tell on you and you know, and that kind of thing. And so there's some other questions in there. Is it an anonymous system? Those kind of things. You know, my preference would be not to have the tattletale thing, especially if it's anonymous, because it just creates this huge issue. So I don't know how it's currently handled. And that was the inquired in my question. Is it a system of phone calls and hotlines and things like that?
So I'm embarrassed to say, after a year of going through this, you're the first person to ask that. And shame on me for not asking the department that question. No, seriously, that's on me, not on you. I promise you, I'll have that answer by the time we're both in 341 tomorrow at 10 a.m.
I think I know the answer to that.
Oh, you know the answer.
Somebody-
Well,
Yeah.
and I think Kirby can, basically I would call, there's not a specific hotline for that. But you would just call Department of Labor and say, hey, my competitor is not playing by the rules. Isn't that basically how it is? Yeah. That's where you call, I know. You call your state rep. All right, next, I think we have Mr. Holly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Chairman Jones, for the work in compiling this, especially trying to find the exact number from the audit. I know that would kind of been the tough time last time. You know, we're looking at, you know, from 36 million to 25 million that's not accounted for in terms of really it's a misrepresentation of the numbers there, because it's what it seems like it's just not the fact that there's an intention to, hopefully there's not an intention to defraud the system, but unfortunately it's just that when you don't have folks who are playing fair, then you will have people who are reporting their 1099s as W-2s. And while I appreciate my colleague, Representative Bonner, point in terms of having that staggered tier system for a fine, because there's different small businesses, they all kind of don't enter the market at the same point. You know, I definitely believe that, yeah, it not having such low of a threshold there, you know, it's necessary. We can't just make it where you have a good bill that it doesn't have any teeth, and you're not going to have any compliance on that. The only other thing that I think the good part of it is just a compliment. It's great to see that you're actually giving the Department of Labor the will, because right now it's not so much about trying to place infractions on companies. This is really creating a relationship between the DOL and business owners to remind them of how not to be fraudulent. So I think if we're not looking at it from a point of actually trying to penalize them, more so looking at proper business practices that help the state to bring in needed revenue, then I believe that so far that's what this bill does.
Well, thank you, Representative Holly. And one of the things I want to state to the committee, as some of you know, I have a significant interest in, pardon me, I have a issue with non-competes, and that's just a personal thing. And so I went to the bar and I asked them the next time they convene their labor attorneys to make sure that they remind the labor attorneys of what the Constitution says as of 2011 around non-competes, and basically who can be covered and who can't be covered. Because I was seeing in the tech sector, which I'm in, I was just seeing folks who I'd like to think just didn't know. I'm just going to leave it at that. It was innocent in terms of forcing, I'll say, lower level and mid-level folks to sign a non-compete. The reason I give that example is if this type of bill does get through this year, I think it's incumbent upon us, assuming Chairman Werkheiser would be okay with it, to go to the bar to make sure that when the labor attorneys are in for their continuing legal education, we give them a 15-minute primer on reminding them, hey, as you're working with startups, as you're working with your mid-tier customers, remind them about classification. So if you haven't already put it off to a PEO, here's the things you need to be thinking about based on this new law. I think that's one of the ways that we can work with industry so that we are seen, to your point, as being proactive versus being, I'll say, reactive and being punitive.
Good point. And we actually have a bill in this committee that we are going to try to tackle non-competes. And I said, we have no easy issues this year. Mr. Kirby, you've been patiently blinking.
Yeah, no problem. More Representative Carpenter's question. And when we talked about drivers and just exactly what you brought up, all of a sudden here comes Uber, here comes Lyft, here comes DoorDash. And I think that's where, in my opinion, we've gotten bogged down over the years and how we look at it. And the ideas, and this isn't certainly in any draft form, but the ideas I shared with Ledge Council for an amendment, you know, if 100% of the equipment is owned by the company, well, Uber and Lyft are their own car. So they would, as the chairman said, most likely fit in that 1099. We talked about 100% of the cost for the tags, the license plate, an IFTA sticker, the physical. You know, these are all the things we're doing for our employees that kind of separate them. Now, I'd hate to think we'd have to end up with a 100-page bill for every industry, construction and real estate and everything else. But I'd rather have a 100-page bill that does it right and takes the stuff out of Sky King and makes sure it's enforced right than to have something that gets loosey-goosey interpreted. So you're on the right track, and you're right into where we've been in the weeds. I forgot, Dewey and I both signed off on 500. I mean, you didn't think he and I both ever signed a bill together. We did on 500 years ago. So.
You have to understand, too, he was the third signer.
And we got a bill next week they're both signers on. And it's a lot more complicated than this one. All right. Floor Leader Bonner.
Thanks. This is just a follow-up to Representative Pruitt's line of question in regards to the reporting. I think one thing I would be interested to know is to be familiar with that reporting process, but then also to see exactly how this is going to impact that. Are we going to basically inundate the department with investigations they cannot handle? they're not funded for, or, any number of things. But I think it'd be important to have that sort of analysis to quantify exactly what we're looking at, because, on the one hand, we don't want to open up a floodgate that we can't handle. That just creates more issues than anything. But then also to have a better understanding of this process. I mean, I'm not personally a fan of the anonymous caller. I believe that it should be a little more a process in place, more in line with our judicial process. So I'd be interested to know that, but I think we probably should look at how that's going to impact kind of the functioning of the department. If, day one, it's going to, you're not going to get you're only going to get a busy signal. So.
And Representative Bonner, I'd like to respond to that. That's, and not to keep going back to the idea of the portal, but two things. One, the idea of the portal was that we expected AI to be able to probably clear 90% of the submittals into the portal, because let's face it, they're kind of straightforward about 90% of the cases. We knew that, well, at least we assumed, pardon me, not knew, that about 10% would be, let's just say, in the gray area, to Representative Carpenter's point, which would require, I'll say, human intervention to provide that initial feedback. If we believe that there is circa $275 million of payroll taxes not being paid, again, I cut that in half just because that's just how I do business. I just cut it in half for conservative purposes. That's circa 135. Not to suggest I'm just looking to hire an FTE, but I think we can justify, not speaking for Chairman England, but we could justify a headcount or two in DOL to clear out that, because of the fact that we expect to see a 9-figure up in the revenue side. So I think there's a lot of different ways, Representative Bonner, for us to work together to see what we can do. But I am with you. I'd rather find a way to be upfront on it as opposed to on the back end.
Yeah, so many great comments.
Yes.
And just 2 weeks ago, I was at our local hardware store, and the guy was loading me up, and it was, I think, right before the previous holiday, and he said, this is the first day I've had off except for a Sunday in like 4 months. I said, wow. I said, you must be making some pretty serious overtime. He said, oh no, they just pay me $300 a week. And the irony, it gets worse. The guy, he was having trouble loading stuff, and he had a very hurt hand. He said, well, my previous employer, I got hurt on the job. And I said, well, I guess workers' comp took care of it. He said, no. He said, my employer said it'd be better if he just handled it directly. And he never got the coverage. And so 2 out of 2 employers in a very small town not treating their workers right. And so we need to work on this. I still don't think we have anybody online. Okay. That seems to have cleared up all the questions, but unfortunately, that gave you a lot of homework. So, but I do hope we are successful and finally coming to some conclusion on this. And so we are, to answer some of your assumptions, yes, we do want to get this out. We will put it on the agenda for next week, as well as we'll have 2 more bills. Both I'm the lead signature on. We have a Department of Labor bill and then a PEO or workers' comp bill next week. So come armed. Thank you, everybody. And with that, I'm sorry. We had somebody sign up to speak to it. Brett Hume, come up. This guy knows as much as anything about this area. Thank you, Todd.
If I could say thank you very much. I have everyone's names who I need to speak with, so I'll start tracking you down tomorrow. Thank you.
All right. Brett, tell us a little bit about who you're with and what you know.
I'm with the Southeast Carpenters Regional Council, and I don't know enough, but I know a few things. Thank you, Representative, for bringing this forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We are exactly to the point on this issue pre-COVID. You're about to have a hearing, and then the legislature recessed last session. So I did supply most of the committee with some data, but just a few talking points on the casualties. This is not an anti-independent contractor bill, nor is it a pro-W-2 employee bill. According to the definition of the Department of Labor, you're either or. The problem we're having here and nationwide is there seems to be some sort of hybrid that exists now to avoid the tax liability. And the chairman just gave 2 examples in his hometown. The casualties of this misclassification are fourfold. One, obviously the worker that is being misclassified as a 1099 doesn't have the overtime pay, doesn't have the workman's compensation, doesn't have the unemployment. Several of you have mentioned those issues already. And obviously, the businesses playing by the rules can't compete, as you heard Representative Jones speak to that point. They're roughly at a 20 to 30% competitive disadvantage because they played by the rules. Not a good concept. The government suffers the lost tax revenue that should be paid had they classified their people properly. And I will submit to you, the public is the 4th casualty because, as the chairman just alluded in his example, the cost of the indigent care comes to all of us. The data that I had submitted directly from the Georgia Department of Labor audits, and by the way, those audits represent only 2% of Georgia businesses. So this is a consistent 4-year average that I've presented based on the 2%. On average, from 16 to 19, 5,527 Georgia workers were misclassified. The additional taxable payroll as a result of the audits consisting of wages, unreported, or misclassified workers is 27.5 million. On average, 4 years running. Okay? If you just take that 2% times the 50 to get to 100%, 276,350 workers are misclassified annually in the state of Georgia. That's the entire population of Savannah and 95% of the population of Macon every year misclassified in terms of real numbers. On the additional taxable payroll, you heard Representative Jones, it's about $275 million on average, uncollected taxes. Again, direct, not considering the indirect cost, the indigent care, everything else. Just to address a couple of the questions from the representatives, Representative Carter, currently the labor commissioner has the discretion. That's how it is currently. I'm all about willing to change something like that, to make something consistent. That just, again, goes to the level of a fair playing field, level playing field. Representative Pruitt, you mentioned about the reporting. Currently, the Department of Labor has a link on the website. That's the extent. Okay. And what happens is we've heard from the Labor Commissioner the past 3 sessions, it's a resource problem. It's a resource problem. This bill, as I read it, attempts to provide a revenue stream to address that resource problem. The last study I saw out of Seattle says their compliance is getting a return of $9 for every 1 spent on compliance. That's a pretty good return. I will also qualify that by it does include workman's compensation, which these figures do not from the Georgia audits. Okay, so that's a whole nother issue to be addressed on a different day. Representative Kirby, I'd love to see the truckers involved. They should be. Transportation is one of the highest exploited industries on this issue. But in 2005, several demographics were excluded. as was mentioned, real estate, life insurance, intern students, trucking was mentioned. If we could find a way to get that back involved, let's do it. The intent was not to change existing law. The intent originally was to cover all the other workers in Georgia that are currently not. Because as was mentioned, Georgia has nothing codified. For being the #1 state to do business 7 years running, why do we put that onus on the companies to research court cases to get to this answer? So with that, I appreciate your time. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Or there's no questions in the room. Anybody online?
Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And you have been working on this issue for years. So, well, there's no more questions. We will see y'all next week at 3 o'clock. We're adjourned.